Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of Diving into DMR. I'm Dan, WX5WX. In this segment, we dive in deeper into radios, repeaters, and hotspots. Oh my! Come join me as we learn more about DMR. All right, welcome to part 2 of Diving into DMR. In this segment, we explore radios, repeaters, and hotspots. So here's the deal. You got to have a radio. That's the way you're going to get into DMR. So, is the feed up? Oh yeah. Hey baby, I'm Dangerous Dan, and I'm breaking into this video to tell you your grandpa's old Yaesu 2400 ain't gonna cut it on DMR. You're gonna have to go out and get yourself a real DMR radio. Hold the feed! Hold it! So, something like this is actually called an Anytone 868. There are several different models of DMR or digital radios, but that's just one. So they've got mobiles, and you've also got handhelds. Got to have one of those. We'll talk more about that later. Also, a hotspot or a repeater. You generally have to have one or the other. Now, if you're fortunate, you may have a repeater in your area. One way to find out if you have a repeater is this particular website called repeaterbook.com. And you can go in here and search, DMR right here. All right, so I'm in Oklahoma, so I typed on Oklahoma. And most repeaters in my area are on the 70 centimeter band. If you can't find some on the 70 centimeter band in your area, just check 2 meter just to be sure. Maybe you happen to be in an area where there are some on 2 meters. But in my area, like I said, it's mostly on 70 centimeters. Now, I'm just going to pick a random one here and click on it. And you're going to notice it gives you some details that you're maybe not as familiar with. Let's see if this. Yeah, here we go. Sorry about that. It's part of doing live recordings, huh? Tulsa Central WA5LVT. Now you look down here, it's got a downlink and an uplink frequency, just like an analog repeater. Your downlink and your uplink. So this is the repeater's transmit frequency. This is the frequency that you're going to transmit on. Offset's 5 megahertz. That's pretty normal, right? You're like, okay, I can do that. But then you get down here and you see color code. What in the world is a color code? Okay, so for all intents and purposes, for just getting going, what a color code is that when you're using an analog repeater, sometimes they have what is called a CTCSS tone or a PL tone. For DMR, that's kind of what the color code is. This is important. You must use the correct color code when you program your radio. So in your radio, you would put 442.475 as the receive, and as the transmit, you'd put 447.475, and you'd put color code 2 when it asks for it. Now, something else that's kind of important, different talk groups. So what is a talk group? Well, I'm going to make this as simple as I can. I'm not going to get into the super technical side of this, but the way I think of this in my very simple mind and make it less confusing, hopefully it works for you as well, is imagine going to a mall. Y'all know what a mall is? A mall. You walk into the mall and you see all these stores, right? Different stores. You got an athletic footwear store. You got different restaurants. You got clothing.
He's making this
stores.
way more complicated than it's got to be and boring. He's putting me to sleep over here.
I don't know.
A talk group is just somewhere you go to yap, man. It's just somewhere you go to yap with people that are like-minded.
Right?
Like a particular subject. Why has it got to make this so drawn out and boring?
Oh,
man. I got to just break in and make all these videos myself.
They are all
I ain't going to listen to this guy anymore.
They're just different hangouts.
Listen to the old Dangerous Dan. I got you.
They have different
I'll explain all this crap to you, man.
Let's say, for instance, you want to talk about Oklahoma weather. Well, I just happened to hang out on talk group 31408. Remember how you got your DMR ID? Well, talk groups have IDs as well. So let's say you have an interest in weather in Oklahoma. There happens to be a talk group for you, talk group 31408. That's right. You tell your radio you want 31408. That's Oklahoma weather. And what you do is on there, you'll find that myself or Joe KF5S or my wife K5DSN were disseminating warnings on that from the National Weather Service. That is not a talk group that you want to hang out on and just chat about your smoker, right? Okay, that's specific for that particular topic of weather. Now, say you want to work people all over the world just for fun. There is a talk group for you. Talk group 91. It is worldwide. Pretty cool, huh? Let's just take a gander over here at some of the different talk groups that Brandmeister offers, shall we? What's behind door number 1? All right, so as you can see here, this is just a listing of a few of the talk groups, not an all-inclusive list. And as you can see, as you look down through there, there's actually 91 is worldwide, 93 is North America, and so on and so on and so on. Talk Group 9 or TG9 is local. So this is just an example of the talk groups that Brandmeister offers. Once again, this is not fully inclusive, just a partial list. So in reference to talking about talk groups, something else that needs to be mentioned, and it's very important, is the concept of static versus dynamic talk groups. Okay? Sometimes it gets a little confusing. I know when I was getting into DMR, man, all these new things that you got to understand were just really making my mind hurt. So I'm going to try to make this as simple but yet informational as possible. A static talk group is a talk group that, and we're talking about on a repeater here because this is what we're discussing right now is repeaters. Okay, on your hotspot, this will be slightly different because you'll determine this. But on a repeater, the repeater owner will determine these two things. A static talk group is one that's permanently activated on a particular time slot by the repeater sysop, so owner. This type of static assignment passes all traffic from the DMR network over the air on the time slot it's assigned to. So, you program in your uplink and downlink repeater frequencies, right? You got your color code. We talked about that briefly too. It's just like a PL or CTCSS tone for all intents and purposes. And then you got to know the time slot, the TS1 or TS2, which is a cool thing about DMR because you can actually have two different conversations going on one frequency. We've talked about that as well. And we've talked about briefly what a talk group is. It's a hangout, right? It's a specific group or a place that people hang out for a specific reason. And I kind of explained that in a very bad way, probably. But a static talk group is one that the repeater owner has set up to permanently monitor that talk group. Okay. However, a dynamic talk group on the other side of that is one that's temporary. And you can key up your radio and activate this talk group for a set period of time. So dynamic talk groups assignments are used for temporary activation on a time slot on a particular repeater. This type of talk group functions for a set amount of time after a local repeater user activates it by transmitting on a repeater using the talk group in their radio. So basically, you've got your radio programmed up, right? You got it all set up, and you want to listen to, let's say, talk group 91 worldwide. Well, it's a dynamic in this particular example. So you would actually go there, key up your radio, and it would activate the repeater. And it would stay on there for a determined amount of time that the repeater owner has determined. And after a period of inactivity, it would go back to disconnecting itself. So that's dynamic versus static, whereas static will be on there all the time. Like a lot of times statewide talk groups, like we have 3140 in Oklahoma, which is Oklahoma statewide. And on time slot 2, most repeater owners have set that up as a static talk group, meaning that you just put your radio on there, and if there's any traffic on that particular talk group, it's going to pass the audio. So that would be static versus dynamic talk groups in a nutshell. Hope that made sense. All right, so let's move on to programming the radio. So how do we tell the radio what we want it to do? Well, every DMR radio manufacturer makes their own what's called a code plug or CPS, which is basically just the software that tells your radio what to do. Now, we're going to take a look at a particular software, which this one is for the Anytones. I have the 868, so we're taking a look at this. I believe this software also works for the 878, but I'm not sure. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Over here on the left, we've got our different pages on this particular um, software and different places we're going to have to program some information in there if we want our radio to behave properly. So we're going to start here at the top left and work our way down. This is not going to be an all-inclusive video. It's not going to go into every detail because, to be honest, there's a lot of functions on here that I'm not even familiar with. So just to kind of give you a heads up on that. But this should give you the basics of how to program up a code plug for your radio. Okay, so over here, the channels, you guys are familiar with channels, right? But look at all these channels. Now, something I want to clear up right away that confused me when I first was starting to program DMR radios. Okay, every talk group you want to use must have its own channel. I know that's like, what? Yeah, so like if you're going to use worldwide talk group 91, you're going to have a channel programmed with that talk group. So let's just use an example here. That's something I've got programmed in here. This is actually my wife's code plug for her handheld, so it's not quite as complicated as mine, but it'll work. So I have a local repeater here, and I've got it named. We're going to go in here and look at that. Let's go. There we go. Okay, so I named it. You can name it anything you want, just as long as you understand what it means, right? So you go over here and start with your receive frequency of your radio. Transmit, that's pretty common, right? You're familiar with that if you're familiar with any repeaters at all. So repeater has to have an input. That's your transmit, excuse me, and it has a receive, which is your output. That's what you are receiving on. So your radio here is receiving on 443.375, and it's transmitting on 448.375. It is digital. So in the digital world, you've got to select whether it's a digital or analog radio or a channel, and this one happens to be digital. You set your transmit power to whichever one you'd like or need, high, low, medium, whichever it is that you need. Bandwidth. So DMR is narrow. Excuse me, the cat came to visit me this morning. But anyway, it is narrow. It's 12.5, not 25, which is what standard analog FM is. Okay, keep that in mind. It is another good feature of DMR is it's narrower, so it takes up less bandwidth. And then we even split that even further into 6.25 so that we can have two different distinct transmissions on one frequency. Okay. Transmit permit. This is something I'll let you decide. You can basically tell your radio if you want it to be able to transmit all the time or only if the repeater's not in use, either the channel's free, color code, or whatnot. I suggest for now leaving this at channel free or different color code. That's my suggestion, but always is okay too. It's up to you. Now, another feature about DMR that's different than analog, at least my familiarity with analog FM, is the fact that you have to set up a scan list, meaning it doesn't just scan through all these different channels, because you can have thousands of channels on some radios, right? So you have to set up a specific scan list and then tell that particular channel that you want it to be associated with that scan list. Okay, not super important right now, but if you want to get into that later, email me if you have trouble or want to understand that better. Email me and I'd be glad to help you. Okay, we're not going to talk about the APRS stuff right now. That can get confusing, and not every radio has that function, so we're not going to talk about that. And then we're going to move over here to the digital end because that's what we're talking about today. Okay. Contact. That's where your talk group's going to go. Your talk group, and you have to set all those up in here as well, and we'll show you that when we get to that tab. But you would select that particular talk group that you want to use. Radio ID. Remember, we have to have a DMR ID. So a cool thing about DMR is the fact that when somebody keys up or transmits, it'll pop up on your screen if you've got that contact list updated in your radio, and it will show the person's call sign and oftentimes name and location. And so you're associating this radio with that particular DMR ID, which is with my wife's. So when she transmits, people see that. I can also change it to mine on the fly if I need to. Like if my radio dies and I need to continue using hers because she doesn't use hers near as much as I do, I can do that as well. Okay. So the color code, you must know what color code your repeater uses. You'll have to find that online or through the owner. Okay. That is important. It's like the PL and CTCSS. Without the proper color code, the repeater is not going to acknowledge you. Time slot or slot. Okay. Slot 2, slot 1. You have to decide that also by finding out locally how that particular repeater is set up. And remember, we're doing a repeater setup right now. When you choose hotspot, if you decide to use a hotspot, we're going to set this up very similarly, except you're going to determine what color code and you're going to determine what time slot is being used. So that makes life really easy, right? So those are pretty much the important features that I use when I'm setting up my code plug for the channel. All right. So let's go ahead and close that screen out. Zone. So zone is like associating multiple talk groups with one repeater. So like for instance, I've got this set up a little differently than some people do. I think the original intent was to have every single repeater set up with one zone and then set up all the different talk groups in there. I don't have that many in Brandy's radio, so I've got it named Brandy actually, and basically you basically assign every channel in that zone that you want, and you can have it set up to analog. Like if you want just analog stuff set up, you can do that. You can do local DMR. You can set up like Oklahoma City DMR, Oklahoma City East. That's up to you. But basically, what you do is you would select the zone, name it, and then bring the channels that you programmed. You should see them over here on the left side. You're going to bring them over here to the right side. Now, Anytone's beautiful because Anytone allows you to associate or order by the name, ID, whatnot. Some radio manufacturers do not allow you to do that. It's just by whatever in the list. You have to move it around manually. This makes it great because I can associate everything in alphabetical order or by ID, whichever I prefer. So basically, with this software, I would click over here like 446575 and then choose that one, or I can just click on it again if I don't want it and take it back over here to the left. Once you do that and you get everything in there you want, you click OK, and you should see that zone named over here. It tells you how many channels are in there. Okay, that's pretty cool. There's that scan list I was talking about. As you can see, I don't have anything set up because we really don't scan. But if you were to want to have the radio scan, you'd have to set up a scan list of all the different channels that you want. Good morning there. How are you doing, Ash? Ash is coming to say hello this morning. Auto repeater offset frequencies. Standard for 2 meters, standard for 70 centimeter. That's what this radio does. Basic information tells you what bands and mode. Tells you the frequency range for UHF and VHF and different versions, whatnot. Optional settings. Okay, so when the power's on, I have this one set up to where it says Brandy's call sign and her name. You can choose whatever you want to. You can also tell it what zone it starts up on and channel. That is really nice, especially if you're somebody that maybe uses one particular talk group all the time, and you want it just to fire up on there. You can set that all up the way you want to. Okay. And some of this stuff I don't even use, but this is just stuff here, brightness of the radio display and whatnot. I'll let you look at that down the road. Okay. Radio ID list. So radio ID list, these are the users. So if you're going to use it, you put your radio ID and your name and call sign in there. I have 2 set in there. I have my wife's and myself, just because we both use her radio, like I mentioned before. Talk groups. We've talked about talk groups. Talk groups. You have to manually put in every talk group that you want to be able to use. So I have Oklahoma weather in here. So what you do is you click on it, name it what you want. For talk groups, it's going to be group call. Group call, not private. Private is set up if you're wanting an individual only. Then you would type in the ID of that particular talk group, which in this case is 31408. And you would do that with every one that you want to be able to use. And that allows you to have the option of selecting it when you're programming the channel. Okay. And all right, so the digital contact list. Now, I'd have to do a whole video on just how to update this. I'm not going to go into it here, but this is important. So they actually publish, I believe daily, there's a website that publishes contact lists. And the contact list is basically going to allow the radio to know the person's ID and name. Okay, remember, people get their DMR IDs every day, right? Like you just did. And my radio won't know you if you just recently got your DMR ID because I haven't updated mine in a while. So you would have to do that. I believe the Anytone is up to 200,000. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's up to 200,000 contacts now. Now that sounds like a lot, but there's a lot worldwide, and you won't be able to put every DMR ID in your radio from the entire world at this time. Okay, so I think that covers most of the code plug information that you need to know to get going. All right, the last subject we're going to cover briefly for today is the MMDVM, Multi-Mode Digital Voice Modem, better known as the Hotspot. These are very important and they're great tools to have if you enjoy DMR. If you don't have a local repeater, you're going to need one of these if you want to enjoy DMR or get into DMR. In the next video, we're going to dive deep into selecting an actual hotspot and setting one up from beginning to end. Thank you for joining me today, and please join me for part 3 of Diving into DMR, the Hotspot. Thanks for watching.